The photograph was supposed to be ordinary, just another sepia memory of a quiet day in the town square, where pigeons gathered at the feet of passers-by and time drifted lazily through the air. In the center of the image sat an elderly man, frail but dignified, his weathered face turned slightly toward the camera as though he had sensed the shutter a moment before it clicked. For decades the picture rested in a forgotten drawer of the municipal archives, its edges curling, its surface speckled with dust and silence. When it resurfaced 85 years later, no one expected it to stir anything more than casual curiosity. But curiosity can be a deceptive thing. It began with a simple zoom on a digital monitor, a routine enhancement performed by an archivist who had sorted through thousands of photographs far stranger and far older than this one. Yet something about the man's posture drew her attention, the tension in his fingers, the way his hand curled protectively around a small, dark shape half hidden in his palm. It was no bigger than a pocket watch, but its form was wrong. Too smooth. Too modern. Too familiar to be possible. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the screen, unable to shake the sense that the object was looking back at her. As she enlarged the image again, the air in the room seemed to shift, taking on a weight she could almost feel pressing against her skin. The man's eyes, murky and distant in the original print, sharpened with each pixel revealed, as though clarity pulled him forward from the depths of time. His expression, once gentle, now appeared strained, desperate, even. And the object in his hand, whatever it was, gleamed with a faint, unnatural sheen, as if catching a light source that the rest of the photograph did not register. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't supposed to happen. Photographs didn't shift tone with magnification. People didn't change expression across decades. Objects didn't glow in pictures taken before electricity reached the town square. Yet there it was, undeniable and impossible. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she suddenly felt that the old man had been waiting for someone, someday, to finally look closely enough to see the truth he could not speak. A truth that, once noticed, could no longer be forgotten. Key point number 1 centers on the moment the photograph, long forgotten and buried beneath decades of dust and neglect, finally resurfaces, and this event becomes the quiet spark that sets everything else in motion. The restoration team working through the old municipal archives approaches their task with routine diligence, expecting nothing more than brittle documents, outdated maps, and the occasional faded portrait of townspeople lost to time. Among these relics, the photograph of the elderly man sitting in the square rests silently in a wooden drawer whose hinges groan from disuse. No one knows who placed it there, or why it was tucked away without proper cataloguing, but its obscurity is the very reason it survived untouched for so long. When the archivists open that drawer, the stale air escaping from it carries the scent of paper decay and forgotten years, making them pause before lifting the stack of photographs that sit inside, each one seemingly unremarkable at first glance. It is only by chance that the image of the old man is pulled from the pile, its curled edges flattening slightly under the archivist's careful fingers, the sepia tone still clinging stubbornly to the paper despite the passage of 85 years. The resurfacing of the photograph is not met with excitement at first. It appears, initially, to be just another piece of local history, an image of a man whose identity is likely lost, whose life story has faded with the ink. The archivist who handles it prepares to scan it like all the others, not sensing anything unusual. The room where she works hums with the low buzz of overhead lights and the soft mechanical whir of the scanner. The atmosphere is calm, steady, almost clinical, and it is within this ordinary environment that extraordinary discoveries tend to hide, because no one is looking for them. She places the photograph onto the glass and closes the lid gently, unaware that she is the first person in nearly a century to see the man's face. When the digital version appears on her monitor, it is clearer than the physical print, each detail crisp enough to bring life back into the frozen square where the man once sat today. The resurfacing of the photograph marks the first break in a long chain of inertia. For decades, the image has remained unseen, unstudied, untouched. Time had essentially erased it from the collective memory of the town. But objects have a strange way of resurfacing at moments when their relevance is suddenly, and mysteriously, renewed. Sometimes it feels as though they wait patiently in the shadows of forgotten drawers for the right pair of eyes to find them. When this photograph finally re-enters the world, it does so not with fanfare but with quiet inevitability, as though something larger has guided it back into the light. The archivist notes its age and condition, logging it into the system, unaware that she is setting off a sequence of discoveries that would unravel the boundaries between past and present. As she begins the restoration process, she takes a closer look at the image. The town square captured in the photograph feels hauntingly familiar yet eerily empty, as though the moment it depicts existed only for the man sitting in it. The benches, the cobblestones, the old fountain in the background, all of these elements match known historical landmarks, but something about the atmosphere of the picture feels subtly off, as if the moment had been sealed or suspended in a way that separates it from the other photographs of the era. The light appears softer, the shadows longer, and the man's figure more pronounced than the rest of the scene. Yet none of this registers with the archivist immediately. It is only when she prepares to categorize it that she notices the handwritten note on the back of the print, scrawled in fading ink. The writing is nearly illegible, smudged by time, but certain shapes of letters suggest urgency, possibly even fear. She sets the photo aside to examine the back more carefully later, not knowing that this act alone is enough to shift her attention more fully onto the man in the image. The photograph's reappearance becomes even more significant once she begins cross-referencing it with the archive's database. No similar image appears anywhere in existing records. There is no documentation of the photo ever being taken, no mention of the man in any town census or personal collection, and no file number assigned to it from past preservation efforts. Its origin is completely untraceable. This anomaly intensifies her curiosity, leading her to search through old newspapers and reports, hoping to match the man's face with someone from the town's history. But each lead dries up quickly, leaving only silence. The man remains nameless, unconnected to any event, family, or location aside from the square in the photograph. It is as though he materialized solely for that one moment, for that one image, and then vanished without leaving the slightest trace in the historical record. With no clear explanation, the archivist begins to feel an unusual pull toward the photograph. She finds herself returning to it repeatedly, examining it under different lighting, adjusting enhancements, zooming in on specific details. Each time she looks at it, she feels as though the man is not merely posing but waiting, his posture too poised, his gaze too direct, his presence too deliberate. The photo's resurfacing no longer feels accidental. It feels timed, purposeful, almost orchestrated by forces she cannot explain. The longer she studies it, the stronger this sensation becomes, as if the image has been trying to be found for years, and she has finally become the person it needed to reach. Through this rediscovery, a subtle shift occurs in the room around her. The ordinary hum of the workspace begins to feel distant, the walls seem to draw closer, the air itself thickens with an indefinable tension. The resurfaced photograph becomes more than a historical artifact, it becomes a gateway to a mystery buried deeper than the archives themselves, a silent doorway to a moment in time that should have been simple but now feels charged with hidden meaning. And as the archivist leans in to study the photo once more, unaware of the avalanche of revelation soon to follow, the resurfaced image sits on her desk as the first quiet sign that the past has decided to speak again, and it chose her to listen. Key point number 2 focuses on the moment researchers finally notice the object in the elderly man's hand, an object so subtle, so easily overlooked, that it had remained invisible for decades. This discovery does not arrive with dramatic flair, instead, it begins as a small flicker of curiosity, a moment when the archivist's eyes narrow just slightly as she leans closer to the monitor. She has scanned thousands of photographs before, each one offering its own minor peculiarities, but something about the man's posture in this image unsettles her. His hand is clenched more tightly than one would expect from someone simply resting in a town square, his fingers curled protectively around something he seems desperate not to drop or expose. When the digital enhancement sharpens the details just enough, she glimpses the dark shape tucked into his palm. It takes a moment for her to register what she is seeing because the object appears out of place, as though it contradicts the era the photograph supposedly belongs to. Initially, she assumes it might be a pocket watch or a rosary, typical items elderly men of the time might have carried. But the shape is too smooth, too precise, lacking the mechanical elements or carved details such things would typically display. She zooms in further, watching the pixels rearrange themselves into clearer contours. The object gleams faintly, reflecting a light source that does not appear anywhere else in the photograph. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her feel, for the first time, that something is wrong. Light in old photographs behaves predictably, but this glow has a peculiar crispness that belongs to modern materials, not the worn metals or dulled surfaces of objects from 85 years ago. The archivist brushes off her unease as a trick of the scanner or an anomaly caused by degradation, but the feeling creeps back the longer she looks. Her colleagues gather around when she calls them over, each leaning in to examine the strange object. One of them suggests adjusting the contrast, another recommends enhancing the shadows. With every alteration, the object becomes clearer without losing its unnatural sheen. The archivist can't name it, but something about it feels strangely familiar, as though she has seen its shape somewhere in the modern world, though she cannot pinpoint where. The more they study it, the more the room falls into uneasy silence. The shape is not symmetrical yet clearly manufactured, not organic yet softened by time. It almost looks like a piece of technology, compact, deliberate, intentional. But that would make no sense. Such technology would not exist until decades after the photograph was taken. The archivists laugh nervously at the absurdity of the idea, but no one actually dismisses it. They continue staring because none of them can reconcile the object with the era. As they zoom in even closer, the man's grip becomes more revealing. His fingers are strained, the knuckles pale, and his hand trembles ever so slightly, as if holding the object requires effort or fear, perhaps both. This is not the relaxed grip of someone casually holding a pocket item. It is the grip of someone who understands the importance of what he carries, someone who cannot afford to let it fall into the wrong hands. The archivist imagines the moment the photo was taken, a quiet square, a photographer passing by, the man frozen not by the camera but by the knowledge of what he holds. She begins to feel as though the image captured more than a moment, it captured a secret. It is then that the researchers notice another unsettling detail: the object appears unweathered by time. The photograph itself has faded, its edges browned and brittle, yet the object looks unnervingly intact, as though it resisted decay entirely. The contrast between the aged surroundings and the pristine object deepens the mystery. For the first time, the archivist feels a shiver crawl through her, the kind of instinctive reaction humans have when confronted with something that does not belong. She tries to explain it logically, perhaps the object's surface simply reflects light in a misleading way, but the explanation feels shallow, an attempt to quiet her growing discomfort rather than a genuine conclusion. As the archivists examine the object more closely, they begin cataloguing its features, its oval shape, the faint line running across its center like a seam, the smoothness of its surface, the way it reflects light in a manner inconsistent with the rest of the photograph. One researcher speculates that it might be made of some rare polished material, but another points out that even polished surfaces from that era would appear duller in such a photograph. They argue quietly, each trying to impose rationality on the image, but the object remains stubbornly inexplicable. The archivist finally sits back in her chair, staring at the monitor long after her colleagues drift away to their own tasks, unable to shake the feeling that the object is somehow watching her as much as she is watching it. She begins researching unusual artifacts from the time period, comparing the object to historical jewelry, religious tokens, and mechanical pieces. Nothing matches. She considers the possibility of a hoax, but the photograph's paper, chemical composition, and aging process are all consistent with authenticity. The object's appearance in the man's hand is not the result of digital manipulation or modern tampering. It was truly there, present in that moment 85 years ago. The archivist wonders about the photographer. Did they notice the object? Did the man try to hide it? Was the picture taken deliberately, or was it the result of chance? The more she questions, the heavier the atmosphere around her becomes, as though the photograph itself resists giving up its secrets. Late in the evening, long after the building has quieted, she returns to her desk and studies the object again. The glow is unmistakable now, a faint aura that seems to pulse with the slightest shift of her perspective. She begins to feel as though the object wants to be seen, as if it has waited decades for this exact moment, for someone with the insight, or misfortune, to look closely enough. The man's expression, once merely solemn, now appears fearful, his gaze directed almost pleadingly toward whoever would one day uncover the truth hidden in his hand. The archivist feels her breath catch as she realizes she is no longer simply examining a photograph, she is stepping into a mystery far older and far deeper than she anticipated. The unnoticed object becomes the key that unlocks everything that follows. It transforms the photograph from a simple historical snapshot into a gateway between the past and something far more unsettling, something that challenges the boundaries of time, reality, and explanation. And as the archivist stares at the object one last time before shutting down her computer, she senses that her discovery has set something in motion, something that has been waiting for decades to rise from the silence and reclaim its place in the present. Key point number 3 revolves around the unraveling of the elderly man's identity, a process that begins with simple curiosity but quickly grows into a profound and unsettling contradiction that no record, photograph, or historical timeline can comfortably contain. After noticing the strange object in the man's hand, the archivist becomes determined to trace who he was, thinking it will be a straightforward search through census records, property deeds, or old family registries. The town, although small, keeps meticulous historical documentation dating back more than a century, and she has previously identified people from even older photographs with relative ease. Yet when she types in the most basic queries, nothing appears. The archives are silent on him, as though the man existed only in that brief captured moment and then evaporated from the timeline entirely. This absence compels her to dig deeper. She begins pulling out old newspapers, hoping to find obituaries or community announcements that might mention an elderly man who spent his days in the town square. The photograph suggests someone who was known locally, someone comfortable enough to sit calmly in a public place with an object of clear personal importance. But as she flips through decades of back issues, narrowing the time window around when the photo was likely taken, she finds no references to a man matching his appearance. No celebratory articles about a beloved elder, no reports of his passing, no mentions of any event involving him. He is completely erased from the written past. The archivist begins to feel the first flicker of unease, as if she is chasing the shadow of someone who was never meant to be found. Her next step leads her to the town's photographic catalogue. She hopes to find the same man appearing in another image, perhaps standing in a shop doorway, attending a community gathering, or walking through the market. People of that era often appeared in multiple photographs over the years, especially if they lived their entire lives in a small town. She uploads dozens of scanned photos into facial recognition software to see if any match. At first the program produces nothing, but then, unexpectedly, a result appears. And it is not what she anticipates. The match is not from the same decade but from a photograph taken 30 years earlier. She opens the image, expecting some kind of error, but when the picture loads, her breath catches. A younger man stands in a crowd, his posture straighter, his features sharper, but unmistakably the same person. The shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes, the faint scar on the left cheek, all identical. It is him. The same man, unchanged, separated by 3 decades but appearing with no signs of aging. The archivist feels a cold sensation wash over her. She double-checks the dates, verifies the source of the earlier photograph, and confirms both images are authentic. She uploads another image from an even earlier file found in the archives. Again, the software produces a match. This time it is from nearly 50 years before the town square photograph. The man appears younger still, but undeniably himself. His presence in these images across multiple decades without a trace of aging makes no sense. Human beings do not freeze in time. They do not appear unchanged in photos taken generations apart. Her hands tremble slightly as she adjusts the settings, trying to search the database more widely, and soon the screen fills with match results from various years, each marking a moment in time where the same face appears, steadily unchanged, standing in different places, sometimes in crowds, sometimes alone, always present yet never recorded by name. What confounds her more is that each photograph depicts the man in locations that suggest he did not belong. One shows him standing on the steps of a building that hadn't existed until after the date on the photo was stamped. Another places him at an event that was supposedly closed to the public. In each picture, he seems almost out of place, not blending naturally into the scene but inserted into it, captured because he happened to be passing through at the exact moment the photograph was taken. There is a pattern forming, and the archivist can sense it, though she cannot yet articulate it. The man does not appear to be living a normal life documented gradually over the years. He appears like a figure wandering between decades, slipping into moments that don't align with any logical timeline. The archivist begins cross-referencing everything she can find. She looks for personal records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, land ownership, but nothing surfaces. It is as if the man deliberately left no trace of his existence beyond these scattered photographic shards. Even more unsettling is that in some pictures, he seems aware of the camera, turning slightly toward the lens, his expression neither startled nor posed, but quietly acknowledging the moment as though expecting it. The knowledge that he was aware of being captured in different eras, while never aging, causes a heavy weight to settle in her chest. She cannot shake the feeling that the man wanted to be seen but not known, noticed but never identified. When she enlarges the earlier images, she finds no hint of the mysterious object in his hand. Yet something about the way he holds his coat or positions his arm suggests he might be concealing something. It leads her to wonder whether he carried that same object through decades, protecting it as fiercely in those moments as he did in the square photograph. If so, the object may be the thread tying together his impossible presence across time. She imagines him walking through eras untouched by age, slipping through the world with a purpose only he understood, pursuing or fleeing something beyond comprehension. As the archivist begins piecing these anomalies together, a new fear forms in her mind. What if he wasn't supposed to be captured in these photographs at all? What if each image was an accident that interrupted something he was trying to avoid? Or worse, what if he allowed himself to be photographed because he knew someone in the future, someone like her, would eventually find him? The thought unsettles her deeply. It introduces questions that move beyond historical curiosity into the realm of the eerie and inexplicable. The man's identity, rather than becoming clearer, dissolves into something far stranger. He is not simply an unknown figure from the past. He is an anomaly threading through time, a presence that defies chronology, logic, and record-keeping. She realizes that discovering who he is means confronting the possibility that he does not belong to any single period, that he might exist outside time's natural flow altogether. And as she stares at the photographs once more, the same unchanging face gazing back across decades, she feels the growing certainty that the man has been waiting for her to uncover him, not to explain who he was, but to understand what he represents, and why his existence is about to change everything. Key point number 4 focuses on the moment when the object that once appeared in the elderly man's hand, an object that should have remained frozen in the past, suddenly resurfaces in the present day. Intact and unchanged, as though time itself had refused to touch it. This moment becomes the bridge between eras, collapsing the comfortable distance between then and now and forcing the archivist to confront the possibility that what she discovered in the photograph has never been contained by history. It begins quietly, almost anticlimactically, with a phone call that interrupts her late-night research. She has spent days submerged in old records, comparing images, chasing leads, and unraveling contradictions so deeply woven that they no longer feel like research anomalies but threads of a larger, unseen design. Exhausted and mentally strained, she nearly ignores the call, assuming it to be a wrong number or a colleague with another unhelpful theory. But something, an instinct, a prickling sense that the story is not done revealing itself, makes her answer. The voice on the other end belongs to an elderly woman who speaks softly, hesitantly, as though unsure if she should be making the call at all. She explains that she works at a small antique shop on the other side of town, a place she has tended for nearly 50 years. Earlier that evening, a young customer brought in an item he found while renovating his grandfather's farmhouse. It was tucked behind a loose panel in the attic wall, wrapped in discolored linen and wedged between beams where no one had touched it for decades. When the customer unwrapped it and handed it to her across the counter, she felt an unexpected chill run through her. The object was smooth, dark, and strangely warm to the touch. And although she couldn't explain why, she felt she had seen it before. She didn't believe the sensation at first. Items often evoke a sense of déjà vu, old tools, heirlooms, trinkets passed down through generations. But she couldn't shake the familiarity of this particular object. Hours later, while sorting through Old Town records to amuse herself, she stumbled upon a photograph in an online archive. There it was, the same object, unmistakable in shape and sheen, resting in the palm of an elderly man whose identity remained a mystery. The photograph had been newly uploaded, tagged for ongoing research. Seeing the object again, frozen in a moment from 85 years earlier, terrified her enough to call the number listed on the archive page. When she describes the object, her voice trembles, and the archivist feels the world shift beneath her, as though the boundary between her research and her reality has dissolved. She rushes to the antique shop, arriving long after closing hours. The shopkeeper unlocks the door with shaking hands and leads her to the back room, where the object sits on a velvet cloth as if placed there for display, though neither woman had the courage to touch it again. Even from several feet away, the archivist recognizes it instantly. It is identical to the one in the photograph, same size, same seam across the center, same impossible glow that seems to pulse in the dim light. She steps closer, her heart pounding, every instinct warning her to keep her distance even as her curiosity pulls her forward. The object shows no signs of age. No scratches. No tarnish. No dust. It looks as though it was crafted moments ago, not discovered in an attic untouched for generations. Time has simply refused to affect it. The archivist reaches out cautiously, half expecting the object to vanish or shatter or react in some dramatic fashion. Instead, it sits with a quiet presence that feels unnervingly aware. When her fingertips brush its surface, a faint warmth spreads through her skin, not the warmth of a heated object but something more organic, almost like the lingering warmth of a hand that recently held it. She withdraws her touch instantly, realizing the temperature makes no sense for something uncovered after decades in a cold attic. The shopkeeper watches her anxiously, wringing her hands, asking repeatedly if they should contact the police or historians or even a museum. But the archivist knows instinctively that none of those institutions would understand what they are holding. She struggles to explain what she has learned through her research: the man who never aged, the photograph spanning decades, the object that should not exist in any documented time period. Speaking the words aloud feels surreal, as though she is narrating someone else's dream, but the object's existence in front of her is undeniable. As she studies it further, she notices faint markings along the seam, tiny, almost microscopic symbols that do not match any known alphabet she has encountered in her academic work. The markings appear to shift subtly when viewed from different angles, like reflections on water catching shifting light. They seem to pulse faintly, though she cannot tell if it is a trick of her eyes or a property of the object itself. She takes several photographs, but the camera struggles to capture its true appearance. In each image, the object appears slightly distorted, as though resisting being recorded again. The archivist feels a wave of dread as she realizes that the object may not simply be unusual, it may be sentient, or at least responsive in ways beyond her understanding. Her mind races with possibilities. Was the man protecting the object or imprisoned by it? Did he carry it willingly across decades, or was he bound to it by circumstances beyond comprehension? And most importantly, why has the object resurfaced now, at a moment when she has uncovered the truth hidden in the old photographs? The timing feels too precise, too deliberate. She voices this fear aloud, and the shopkeeper crosses herself instinctively, whispering that some things are better left undiscovered. But the archivist cannot retreat now. She realizes that the object's return signals something imminent, something the man may have foreseen but could not prevent. The presence of the object in the present day reframes everything she thought she understood. It is no longer a historical puzzle locked safely in the past. It is a living question, a message, a warning, or perhaps an unfinished task waiting to be completed. And as she stares at it in the dim light of the antique shop, she feels an unmistakable truth settle over her: the past is no longer distant. It is reaching out, and she is now caught in its grasp. Key point number 5 centers on the moment the truth begins to surface, slowly at first, like something stirring beneath deep water, then with accelerating clarity that forces the archivist to confront what the elderly man had been trying to do all those years ago. With the object recovered, the photographs analyzed, and the man's impossible appearances documented across multiple decades, the archivist senses that she is standing on the threshold of a revelation that will not only explain the past but interfere with the present. She spends several nights poring over her notes, sketching timelines that refuse to align, and comparing the object's markings to any known language or symbology. Every thread she pulls leads to a deeper, darker tangle. The man's presence in different eras was never random. His expressions, positions, and postures in each photograph seem subtly purposeful, as though he was leaving behind fragments of a message he hoped someone, someday, would piece together. And now she realizes with growing dread that she is that someone. The next stage of her research begins when she makes a startling connection between the object's markings and a set of coded diagrams found in a forgotten drawer within the municipal archives. The diagrams appear to have been sketched by someone with a deep understanding of engineering or physics, yet they are dated nearly a century ago, far beyond the time such knowledge or concepts should have existed. The lines and curves in the diagrams reflect the same patterns etched into the object's surface, almost as if the creator had studied the object intimately or had attempted to replicate its inner workings. What jars her most is the signature on the bottom corner of each page, a simple initial, a single letter, yet one that matches a faint marking found near the seam of the object itself. She realizes the man in the photograph may have authored these diagrams. If he did, it means he had been studying the object long before it became frozen in the attic, suggesting that he may have been trying to understand it just as she is now. The diagrams lead her to another realization: the man was not simply a bystander. He was someone who understood the gravity of the object he carried. He might have been its guardian, its prisoner, or its last hope. The more she studies the diagrams, the more she sees patterns that hint at something extraordinary, a device that seems to operate outside the constraints of normal time, a mechanism that could move or distort moments instead of measuring them. The archivist's heart pounds as she grasps the implications. If the object is capable of manipulating time, then the man's repeated appearances across different decades are not coincidences but consequences. He may not have been immortal, he may have been displaced, pulled, or trapped in fragments of time by the very thing he tried to control. The photographs were not records of a long life but glimpses of a fractured existence scattered across timelines. This realization brings both clarity and terror. If the object is a temporal device, then the man's aging, or lack thereof, becomes horrifyingly logical. Perhaps each time he attempted to activate or deactivate the object, it shifted him unpredictably, throwing him into different eras without his consent. He might have spent years wandering through times not his own, searching for a way to stop the device from tearing him further apart or preventing something catastrophic from happening. His presence in the town square, seated with solemn determination and clutching the object tightly, begins to take on new meaning. He wasn't merely an old man resting. He was someone preparing himself for a final attempt to control the device or perhaps pass it to someone else before it consumed him entirely. The look in his eyes, a mix of fear, resolve, and exhaustion, was the quiet expression of a man who had seen too much and carried too heavy a burden. The archivist begins to feel an unsettling connection to him. She imagines his desperation, the weight of knowing that the object in his hand could alter reality in ways no one should ever wield, and the loneliness of being the only person aware of its true power. She feels him reaching through time, using the only medium available to him, photographs that captured him accidentally or intentionally during his temporal displacements. Each image became a breadcrumb, a silent cry for help, or perhaps a guide for whoever would later inherit the responsibility he bore. Now the object has resurfaced, unchanged and alive with its strange pulse, and she understands that its arrival is not accidental. The man carried it until the last moment he could, trying to hide it, contain it, or leave it somewhere distant from the world. But something caused it to reappear, suggesting that whatever he tried to prevent is no longer held back. The truth grows heavier as she interprets the diagrams and the man's movements through time. The object was not built, it was found. Found by him, held by him, studied by him, and feared by him. It is something that does not belong to any timeline, something that intruded upon human history by mistake or design. The man may have spent his entire life, and whatever pieces of life came after, trying to return it to wherever it came from or keep it dormant. But time has boundaries, and boundaries eventually strain. The archivist realizes that the object reawakening is not just a continuation of his story but the beginning of her involvement. She is the first person in 85 years to understand enough to continue his work, to solve the parts he could not, or to protect the world from whatever the object threatens to unleash. As this truth dawns on her, she feels the room grow colder. The diagrams flutter on her desk as if stirred by an unseen breath. The object sits on the cloth nearby, its faint glow deepening, almost as if acknowledging her realization. She feels a chilling certainty settle over her. The man had not been trying to escape time but to contain something that time alone could not bury. And now, with the object returned and the man long gone, the responsibility, and the danger, has passed to her.